Episode 15 of the New England Sports Media Podcast brings us another Hartford Current reporter, Alexa Philippou, the women's basketball at UConn beat reporter, as well as the Connecticut Sun, as well as sometimes doing some other things. Alexa, thanks for being with me today on this podcast.
Yeah, of course. No problem.
And was going to be my colleague at one point until COVID happened. But anyway, we're gonna leave that aside. Alexa, obviously you just covered the Connecticut Sun from them being down in the bubble. Can you describe like just what the experience was like covering them from home and kind of the day-to-day aspect of covering the WNBA from so far away?
Yeah, it was a lot less fun than it was last year, which was my first year covering them full time. But it ended up not being as bad as I expected because the access we had over Zoom for not just the Sun, but really all the teams in the bubble was great. So I could hop on a Sun, like shoot around availability and then hop on a different teams, like whenever. And that really made our jobs easier. I think that was across the board, kind of the sentiment by the end of the season is that we were all kind of thankful about how they were so organized with everything. And covering games remotely was just weird because I was literally just like sitting on my couch and you're used to actually interacting with all these people in person, and instead it's just you have a screen in front of you. So I think we all made do. I'm hoping that things will kind of return to normal moving forward so that we can get that in-person interaction. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I love the job that I do, is because usually you are in person, like at a game, interacting with people, getting to know people, whether or not that's, obviously the team and the coaches or even your colleagues. But that element was definitely, missed this year.
For sure. So in terms of the access, like were you able to get like one-on-one Zoom interviews and that type of stuff? Or like if you wanted something kind of outside of like the normal shoot around or post-game press conference?
Yeah, all of that was still readily available. You had to go through the normal kind of sort of steps to do that, but that wasn't necessarily sacrifice. It just was that in some cases I did ask specifically for a Zoom one-on-one, just because if it was a topic where I was like, I feel like I need to like talk with the player about this like face to face almost, then I would kind of try and push for that. But if it was just like a normal thing, like a normal run of the mill thing, it was phone calls were always easy to get a hold of.
So obviously the WNBA was like really the model league for in terms of like social justice. I mean, like getting the Black Lives Matter on the court was like a Breanna Stewart thing. Like obviously, they are a lot of them are very uh good about, doing things in the community, all that stuff. In your conversations with those players, how much and how important was it to get those stories out as well as the basketball, and how did you kind of balance that from your position?
I think that was almost like a non-negotiable for them to actually have the season, was for there to be a social justice component. And the WNBA specifically was honoring throughout the season and doing other work surrounding female victims of police violence. So they worked with the African American Policy Forum to learn more themselves, but also to kind of put that advocacy and activism at the forefront of their season. So, I mean, it was very important for all the players. We saw last night some of the Storm players, as they were celebrating their championship, dedicated the title to other, young Black girls and women who needed kind of to feel a victory, but also to Breonna Taylor, who, was the emergency room technician who was shot by police and killed in Louisville. So that was always at the forefront of their minds, and especially because there was that stoppage of play when the NBA kind of did their boycott, or now I'm forgetting what word was the proper word. I think it was strike. Sorry, when the NBA did their strike, and then the WNBA did theirs as well. That was, I mean, we kind of had that resurgence of discussion about their activism and police violence and systemic racism. That at times it really did, especially, well, at least from my experience with the Sun, a lot of the times it was a lot of basketball, but like that moment and that last week of August, it all kind of came back to the surface. So it was very present throughout the whole season.
For sure. And now obviously the other main part of your job is the UConn women's basketball program. I'm curious, as someone who graduated college a couple of years ago, and when you're around the UConn team in like a normal world, do you think being a younger person kind of helps you just relate to them and like get stories and stuff? I know like for me being in college, it obviously helped a lot, but as a younger reporter, like, do you think you're kind of able, and maybe even with WNBA players too, like, cause like you're probably the same age as a lot of them. Like, do you think your age kind of might help you with getting to know them and getting them to kind of open up to you?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I do think about that, and I've never really like flat out asked anyone, just
Right.
because it's kind of a weird thing to ask. But I think I wouldn't be shocked if age and gender, just because
Right.
I'm still generally one of the only women around, especially UConn. I think that might help. I really am not that much older than them, which is crazy. Like I think most of the other beat reporters, most of them, not all of them, are maybe closer in age to Gino
Right.
versus I'm closer in age to the players. So that's just interesting. I don't really know if they see it that way. We still have, especially with UConn, where you're all kind of still in a group, like there's less one-on-one time.
Right.
It's not like I'm getting special access or stories or
Right.
anything because of that, but I hope they feel a little bit more comfortable, because I
Mhm.
feel like I try in general, it's not even just about an age or a gender thing. I always just go forth to try and, talk with them
Sure.
like they're other humans, like they're, like I want to be a human first before I'm a journalist. So I'm not trying to be
Definitely.
a robot out there.
So like,
So I hope
yeah.
they get that sense.
So like the ethos of this podcast, a lot of it is talking about how people do their jobs, and we've obviously touched on that. We just had an episode with someone who covers Providence College men's basketball. So we talked a lot about access, and I'm curious especially for the UConn basketball program, like colleges. Some colleges have great access, some have terrible access, some are somewhere in between, and sometimes it doesn't even matter. Whether it's a Power Five school, they could be great, and if it's a Patriot League school, they could be tough. So, what's the access like in a normal year for UConn women's basketball? Are there media availabilities? Are there opportunities to request one-on-ones? Does Gino talk twice a week, once a week? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, so this is only based off my 1 year on the
Right,
beat, so I
right.
can't speak to what they did
Well, that's the
before.
most recent year, though, so it's good. It's a good example.
Right. It's the most recent year. And it's also like this year, we still don't really know. I can talk to what they've done so far, which has been interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
If
We'll
there's
go on that.
Zoom. But yeah, like last year, it was pretty regularly. I don't even know, like once or twice a week. Everything was just one long week to me, like one long basketball
Right.
season. So I think it was probably once or twice a week where we could go to practice. They would usually just bring out a few players. You could request someone, but normally everyone just kind of would talk with, a handful of players. And then Gino would have his scrum, and this was always before practice for the most part. So then you could stay and watch the first 30 minutes, and then, which I always like to do because I'm kind of, still a little bit of a basketball nerd. So I like to see what they're doing. And so, yeah, I mean, if you wanted to do one-on-ones, it was harder to get like one-on-one time with Gino during the season. But like, if, I wrote a story on Olivia Nelson-Adota, who's now junior, and I wanted to talk with her specifically about shot blocking. So I requested like one-on-one time with
Right.
her, and I just went off to the side and talked with her. It could have been done in front of other people. It wasn't some like
Yeah.
revelatory thing. But yeah, I
Right.
mean, I think I don't have a great sense of comparison for how other women's teams do it, but
Right.
like in general, the access is really good. And I think they
Yeah.
know, because it's not just me, it's not just, one or two other people. There could be anywhere between, 10 to 12
Yeah.
people at a given availability, so that they know like this is the drill. They know they have to kind of make people accessible.
Mhm.
So I've had, you know, I think it's a pretty good setup as far
For
as I'm
sure.
concerned.
Obviously, like the UConn program in recent years, or I should say like the past, whatever years has been, like the model women's basketball program. Um, in terms of like the Hartford Current's coverage, like and the readership, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but like compared to the men's and women's, like how close is it? Is the women's more popular? Is the men's more popular? Like what is kind of like the thirst for UConn basketball based on like men's and women's?
Yeah, I don't usually look at the like the metrics of men's stories like super regularly, just because I'm more concerned about how,
Right.
the women's stories are doing. But I mean, in terms of just general sports readership, it's definitely like, I think I get the sense that a lot of people subscribe to the Current, or read our sports page a lot, just to, follow the UConn women. I never fully, I think, realized before taking this job how intense fan bases. I think that's a great thing because I don't try and take that for granted because I don't think you have that everywhere. That's just that there's such a demand for, I could be doing such a tiny little update on Avina Westbrook's Avina Westbrook's knee. And, all these people could be really interested on it, or recruiting. Recruiting is a huge thing that people are really interested in. So I think it's great. There's definitely a huge demand there. And I think that also shows in how the Current has decided to allocate resources. Now, could change in COVID times, but generally speaking, I would go to every game, home or away. And I think that kind of shows that their commitment to covering UConn, and that was something that our readership cares about, getting that coverage like basically 24/7. And before the NCAA tournament got canceled, I was going to go to the Final Four, regardless of whether UConn made it, which I was excited about because I think there's also just, there were stories to be told, even if they didn't advance that far.
For sure.
Them not actually being in the Final Four would have been a huge story in of itself. So I do definitely, that's one of the reasons why I love what I do, is because I get that there's an interest from the kind of the readership standpoint, and also there's been a commitment from the Current to, there's no like, oh, it's women's basketball, it's like it's less important than men's. Like,
no, I've always assumed. I know I went to a UConn men's game once because BU, where I went, was playing at UConn, and I was talking to one of the ushers, and they were like, the women's games sell out more than the men's games do, which makes sense to me because they're very, very good. Are you the only person that travels regularly as like a beat writer or reporter or TV person that goes to all the UConn women's road games?
So it was me, and then one of my colleagues, Doug Bonjour, who works for Hearst. We were the only two that went to every game. So I think it used to be a lot more. Like, Gina's told these stories of how thered be like, I don't know, like 7 traveling beat reporters. And obviously now with everyone's kind of financial situation, that's a lot less it's not as possible. So, I mean, some people would go to like this year, if Tennessee and Baylor, are held at Tennessee and Baylor, like maybe a few beat writers specifically go to those games, like they choose a few big non-conference games to go to, or close conference games. But every game, it was really only Doug and me.
For sure. So you kind of touched on this earlier, hinted at it. It's like, what are they doing right now for access and stuff like that? Or what do they do over the summer? I know sometimes there are some open things in the summer. So what has that been like? And what do you think it's going to look like moving forward?
Yeah. So the first availability we had with them, I want to say, was in early August. That I was, at least with the whole team, they had like maybe 1 or 2 with Gino, one in July with Gino. I think when they returned to the Big East, I think that was over Zoom. I was furloughed that week, so I did not hop on that call. But the first one with the whole team was in August, and they did Gino and all 11 players, and it was like 3 or 4 hours long, but it was really helpful because I literally think 7 stories out of that, one sitting. So that was great. Everything was over Zoom. There was no tech glitches. It was just, something weird to get used to. And then last week they did one with Gino and the 3 captains, and they tried breakout rooms over Zoom for the first time, which I was very nervous about because I didn't even know how to get into a breakout room. I've never done that before over Zoom, but it honestly went super smoothly. And that was closer to what we actually have in like a regular availability setting, where you can just kind of like go up to someone and start talking with them and then leave whenever. Like, it's not as rigid, and it's not like everyone's talking to one player at the same time.
So where were the players for that? Were they in the locker room, or like their like dorm rooms, or like where were they located?
I don't know where they were. They might have been in like the basketball building. I couldn't really tell if they had just come from practice or what. They were, it wasn't really that clear, but they were just kind of all, I guess, on their own, in their own spaces, all 3 of them. And then the UConn SID was, she could put us into separate breakout rooms, but she said there's a way that we can do that ourselves. So that's like the next step moving forward.
That's pretty good. It sounds like they're really trying to give you guys good access.
Yeah, honestly, I did not know what to expect. And I still don't really know 100% what to expect, but if it's like that, I think it would be manageable. I think at this point, they just want to do whatever's safe for everyone. Like the players, as far as I know, are not really seeing other non-athletes because they have to get regularly tested. They know that the rest of the student body isn't getting regularly tested. like Gino, obviously, I mean, look, Gino's like 66, like
Right.
he should be safe. Like the whole coach, everyone should be safe. Like we should be safe. We have,
Yeah, of course.
for everyone's, I guess, benefit, I'm saying is that if this
Yeah.
is what makes the most sense, then I think we can make do with it. Hopefully not long term. Like I would once post pandemic, I want, the in-person stuff to
Yeah,
come
of
back to
course.
normal.
I think
But
everyone does. I think that's for sure. Especially at like the college level. It's just so much better. So I'm curious, obviously, like Paige Beckers comes in this year. She is, in terms of social media, like on her own level, like I think she'll probably set the precedent and be the precedent for being a popular high school girls basketball player. I mean, hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, Slam magazine covers, all that stuff. How has it been? Like, have you talked to her yet as a UConn kid? I'm sure you talked to her as like a high schooler, but have you talked to her as a UConn kid yet? And I'm curious, like, does she interview the same way? Has anything changed?
yeah, we talked with her that one day where we talked with everyone on the team.
Hmm.
That was the first time as a UConn player where we actually all kind of had her for availability. But I get the sense from her. I mean, I think she's a really grounded kid. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
this is I don't think it's like a farce or anything like that. But I think she just like has been through the media stuff so much that she just like she says like good things, like she's not like a robot out there, but she is like very natural.
Right.
But she's not trying to be like I as flashy as her game is, like I've never gotten the sense that she like wants to be like she's like reveling in the attention or anything like that. Like she
Yeah.
just seems very down to earth from what I've seen so far and from what I think others have said about her. So it'll be interesting to see now, like once we regularly talk with her, because so far that was only, the one time we've spoken with her. We've spoken with the captains twice
Right.
at this point. How that kind of changes throughout the year, especially once like, we're going to be talking about her game and, I don't say critiquing her game, but, like the stakes are a little higher, like how that all kind of pans
Right.
out. But I think she's been used to the media attention for so long. And
Right.
I think this isn't anything, crazy new to her. Maybe for some of the other freshmen.
Yeah, I can imagine that a lot of those freshmen who aren't like a Paige Beckers who like, they come in and they're obviously a great high school player and like they probably get interviewed after a lot of their high school games, but I can imagine this is a whole different beast for some of the freshmen who come from other like Playoff Gabriel, like who's a freshman this year. Like she went to Bradford Christian. Like I don't know if with Globe we didn't cover her, so like I don't know how much she. I mean, obviously an NBA brother helps, but
Yeah,
I'm
I think
curious.
the biggest difference would be, I'm sure, because most of them, especially your recruits going to UConn, you're used to people interviewing you.
Right.
Like, I mean, I like even if their local media isn't reaching out to them, I usually interview them
Right.
once they've committed.
Right.
But the difference here is that we have like these, like we're a big scrum. There's like again,
Right.
like can be up to 10 to 12 to 15 of us on a given day. Like the fact that we're always present, like I'm sure that's kind of different because it's,
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
certainly unique in women's basketball. And I'm sure even some men's programs probably don't have that many people.
No, first definitely not. I mean, I think there are a lot of. I mean, the Power Five schools probably do, and then some other like the Big East schools. But I don't think. I mean, I can tell you the schools in Boston, even BC, there's really not much media coverage. So, um, how about in terms of like social media? I'm curious how much you use it for reporting, how much you use it just to like see what people our interests are. Do you find stories on it? Like, what is your relationship with social media and your job?
I would say unhealthy. I'm on it way too much. I'm actually, as I told you, technically I'm on PTO this week, but I've been like way too much on Twitter and I'm like, I need to delete, especially now that like the WNBA season is officially over.
Yeah.
I'm like, I need to delete Twitter. I need like mental separation. I do find it helpful, as much as it's probably not great for me to be doom scrolling all the time, but I think it helps to see where, get a pulse of where the fan base is. I love it too, because I really do use it to get a sense of where, when I'm covering the WNBA, like what else is happening in the
Right.
WNBA, or I'm covering college, like what's happening with other teams. It really is, so easy to read like digestible chunks of information if you don't have time to kind of go through the I'll, read a ton of stories or whatnot, or listen to a ton of podcasts. So yeah, I really do use it a lot. I wish I were off it a little less, but I do think it's probably, I'm kind of one of those people who's like, I feel like I need it for my job, which I know so many reporters from like previous generations obviously like weren't using it that much, or like aren't, if they're still reporting now, they don't kind of feel that need. So I think it's part
like Jackie
generational.
McMullen doesn't have a Twitter, which blows my mind.
Right. But like obviously like
But she doesn't need it.
she doesn't need it. But yeah, I think it's generally good. And I think one of the things I try to do with my job is I want people to feel like they should come to the Current, not just like local readers to read about UConn or to read about the Sun or the WNBA, but I think I use Twitter to kind of reach a broader audience. And I think that's kind of started to come together for me. So if you're, if you like to follow women's basketball, but you live in California, maybe, I don't know, like maybe they don't still subscribe to the Current, but maybe still they connect the Current with women's basketball coverage. And hopefully one day that might lead to a subscription if they really like what we're covering. So that's kind of in the back of my mind as I use Twitter.
Yeah, for sure. So as someone who like recently graduated college, can you kind of take us through like those kind of back end internships of your like college career, then how you got to the Current, like how much time went by, like kind of the path to getting to where you are, just because it's still pretty fresh?
Yeah. So I graduated in June 2018 and had back-to-back internships lined up. So I was that summer I was at the Seattle Times, and then I went literally right into another internship afterward at the Dallas Morning News, where I covered high school football. But I knew pretty early on that I felt like, especially because I was like moving from California where I went to school to Seattle over a weekend, like after graduation, starting that internship, and then like moving to Texas, like after the Seattle internship over a weekend before starting like that internship. So I knew I really wanted some time just to not like, just to really like, I wanted to travel. I wanted to have a mental break. I knew that once I started my real job, it was going to be like, it was going to be crazy. So I was really lucky that all worked out. I worked worked at a catering company as a server. I did helped with some research with my advisor from school. I did stuff like that, and then I ended up, that was maybe 4 or 5 months after the Dallas internship, and then before I ended up going on a 7-week trip to Greece, which is where my family's from. And I'd always kind of thought, like dreamed of like having this like long extended trip there to really just like connect with my family and my roots, and being able to travel a lot to see a few different islands. So I did that. And then I was in Greece, in Athens, when I saw the job listing for the my current job. And so as soon as I got back, luckily they didn't close the listing, and I applied, and basically less than 2 months later, that all kind of got it, went through the job application process, and they gave me the job, and I moved up to Connecticut.
No doubt, no doubt. And so you're from Baltimore originally, right? So this is like the first time you've been like within like a driving distance to home, like in
Yes.
years,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
So
Yes. So
what were like the last 7 months like? I know you said that you went home for a while. Like what was just like pandemic mode like?
Yeah. So the Current was really understanding at the beginning of the pandemic. I was like, I was just like, everyone's really scared, and like there's so much uncertainty, and they had already told us we were going to be working remotely, that they let me go home basically from March to it was like end of March to end of June. That's when they like officially called me back to Connecticut. So I worked those 3 months, and I did everything I normally would have done, just instead of being holed up in my 1-bedroom apartment in Hartford, I was at home with my family, which was great because my brothers who are in college were home too. So then went back to Hartford, was, working WNBA most of that time. And then now that I'm off, I'm back here just for a little bit before, when I recharge. And then I know once I get back to work, it's going to be all UConn for the rest of, basically till April.
No, for sure, for sure. Do you ever foray into like other UConn sports, like maybe like like non-revenue sports or Olympic sports? Like I know their field hockey team is like really, really good. Like, do you ever kind of like go into those things and do some features?
Yeah, so I haven't a ton. I think the last non-UConn basketball story I did was when they cut it was 4 different sports at UConn. That was over the
Yeah.
summer, I would say end of June. I was kind of involved with some of that coverage, which obviously was like a huge story because whenever that many sports are cut in light of,
Mhm.
obviously the pandemic was,
Yeah, and they kind of like were one of the first schools to make that move, right?
yeah. And it was a lot too. Like Stanford, which is where I went, they cut a bunch of sports. That was until afterward though. So this was like
Right.
the first time it felt like a major a major sports school
For
basically was
sure.
cutting that many programs. So involved with that coverage, but somehow, and I don't even know how this, I mean, how did that happen? I guess maybe like occasionally I would like pick up like UConn football scheduling stuff, but
Mhm.
there was, I don't know how, but like the months between like the end, the cancellation of the NCAA tournament and like the start of the WNBA season, we're still like so busy, mostly because there's only 2 sports reporters at the time, like actively working. But I've like, now that you're like, oh, what did you write then? I'm like, what did I write then? But it was like super stressful. But yeah, so there's always something that'll keep you busy, whether or not it's UConn or, hopping on high schools. I wrote like a random equestrian story. I wrote a random like swimming
Yeah,
story.
you
So
did
there's
some high school
other,
football last fall too, right?
that was like one week I
Just like
like
a
helped out.
one-off. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of a one-off. So it ends up working out pretty well for me because I think like in terms of regular beat coverage, like I just love covering women's basketball. So the fact that I'm doing that like basically 90% of the time is a good fit.
No doubt, no doubt. Um, well, I think that's really all we got here. I appreciate you giving us some time, or me some time, I guess, today. Really interesting stuff, and we'll have this up soon. And thanks again.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Greg.
Yeah, of course, of course.